Hi everyone, how's it going? We are so excited today to have a very special guest here with us at MetaWorldX, and we will be talking about transportation, mobility, and smart cities. This is a topic that has become more and more important than ever before, especially with climate change and the densification of our cities. What better person to bring to this talk than Timothy Papandreou? Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks, Raza, for having me.
Awesome. We are so excited. I've known Tim for a while now, and I'm just amazed by the work that he's accomplished, the work that he's doing, and I'm really excited about the work that he's about to do. So today we're going to get a better sense of where transportation mobility, especially when it comes to smart cities, the direction where the industry is going on a global level as well as on a micro city level. So Tim, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the people that are probably meeting you for the first time?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Timothy Papandreou. I'm the founder and CEO of Emerging Transport Advisors. And we work mainly with corporations, governments, startups, and investors to help navigate this extraordinarily complex world of transportation, mobility, and smart cities, and trying to help them create a path that makes sense for them, where we basically create a glimpse into the world of tomorrow's mobility opportunities and give them the roadmap or the toolkits that they need so they can actually successfully seize those opportunities and implement them at scale. So it's a really exciting time to be here.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's what interests me about where, so we've got to spend some time together, and we were lucky enough to see each other face to face. Something that we discuss regularly is, what's emerging right now with cities, especially in the mobility space, electrification of vehicles, the emergence of IoT devices and mobile tracking on public transit, multimodal connectivity, smart traffic management, urban planning, which is my background, and data utilization. So why don't we go ahead and start by looking at the global or the macro perspective of what's happening in the transportation industry?
Yeah, so if we can zoom out a little bit, it's amazing is that for the first time in history, more than half the world's population lives in cities. And that's taken us all of civilization to get us to this point. But in the next 25 years, three-quarters of the world's population will be living in cities. And that means three things. 3 billion people are either being born or moving to cities between now and 2050. We are literally, if we do this as planned, we're going to double the urban footprint of the planet. And then that means that 3 billion people right now don't have access to the internet. They're not connected to the internet. So that's an opportunity to connect 3 billion people who are already missing out on this incredible opportunity that makes for our world. So you can imagine now what this means. We cannot build the same way that we have in the past. We cannot expect to move around the same way we have in the past. Everything that we've done from the status quo just is not going to work. So we need radical new solutions. I call them moonshots. We need moonshot approaches so that we can basically solve these global problems with breakthrough technology and figure out ways that we can scale it across the planet, because there's 5,000 metropolitan areas in the world that will radically transform, and there's no way we can do it with our tools of yesterday.
So essentially, especially being here in North America, growing up, we realized, urban sprawl became a huge issue, getting connected to our downtown cores, having satellite cities, and transit-oriented developments, the emergence of transit-oriented developments. But living in a city like Toronto, honestly, Tim, I don't feel that even with these TODs and creating, a better mobility systems, I still feel like we are just scratching the surface. Like there's a long, long way to go. And then with the emergence of all these, mega cities around the world, are you hopeful with the trend right now, or do you think we have to really step up?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, right? So most of the world's urban form uh, really expanded with the invention and the proliferation of the automobile and that whole concept. So this whole package came with that. So 100 years ago, we had this massive technological change. We had automobiles, which was basically the result of mass production. We had elevators, which created high rises. And then we had the invention of like electricity and telephones, etc. So the concept of time and space got reimagined. And then we had zoning, which came in, which basically separated, because cities were pretty dirty back then. You know, there was a lot of pollution from factories that were right next door to people living. So the thought back then was, well, if we separate things out, we put all the manufacturing, city pollution, factory stuff out away, and then we put the residential areas in these clean, you know, areas with like trees and stuff. And then in the center is the downtown. That would work. But the world back then was very different. Men were the only ones who were in the economy, right? Women stayed at home looking after children or didn't participate in the economy. And it was men that basically went into work, into these offices or these factories and came back. After World War II, all that went upside down, but the model kept on going. We kept on creating more and more of these separated land uses. We reduced the density because cars couldn't handle too much density. So we spread things out further and further. And now we have the mess that we have today. And so all of that combined has become the model of modernity. So what that means is that every emerging economy is like, well, we want what America has, we want what Canada has, we want what Australia has, because that's the definition of being modern. But that's actually the wrong way going forward, because that became a very energy intensive, highly polluting, very expensive way to do things. We can't even afford the infrastructure we have, let alone maintain it. And it created this situation now where people are realizing that they're stuck in traffic. 10 days of their lives are stuck in traffic. 15% of our population is disabled, and they can't maintain a full-time job because they can't operate or afford a car. And then we have 1.25 million people being killed every year because of car crashes worldwide. And then we have extraordinary amounts of land being used in these unsustainable ways, which means more water, more energy, more electricity, you know, more farmland being destroyed, all these things. So cities, the modern version of cities are really energy intensive, and they're really bad for our environment, for our lifestyle, for our social inclusion, for our economic stability, etc. And yet they're 3/4 of our GDP is in cities. So we are an emerging city planet. Our economy is cities. And so now we have to think about ways that we can bring nature back in. We have to bring nature to our cities rather than putting parks in cities. We need to put cities in parks, right? Which means that we need gardens, we need landscaping, we need nature services, we need the water filtration, we need the food growing. All that has to now come into cities. So while we have a baseline that's really difficult to change, and in some places it won't be changeable, we'll have to basically move from them because of the situation with rising sea levels, increasing weather events, all these different things. But we have amazing tools now, whether it's using, you know, generative AI or using digital twins or using ways that we can use autonomy or electrification, for example, or even good policy, which is making sure that we can allow walking and bicycling and two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which are the majority of transport in the world, having those create greater access to our cities around us. Those things will help us change and flip the switch, but it's going to take time, unfortunately. And everything is in the fringes right now because the urban form has been built. If you live in a grid system, there's so much you can do to improve the grid system and allocate walking, bicycling, and public transport and densifying those spaces. But if you live in a cul-de-sac system that is basically curvilinear with cul-de-sacs and suburban malls that are separated, that's a really challenging environment. You now need to think about redeveloping those suburban mall clusters and actually creating TODs, but actual real cities inside those suburban enclaves. So there'll be some retrofitting that we'll do. And you're right, it may not really change the needle as much as it needs to in those places, but then we're going to do some wholesale changes in new cities and in edge developments that will move that situation along enough that it'll make it sense. And then we have to retrofit the existing cities. So in the existing cities, we're going to have to change the street layout. We're going to have to prioritize walking, prioritize bicycling, two-wheelers and three-wheelers. We're going to have dedicated lanes for high capacity public transport, whether that is run autonomously, electric or not. It doesn't really matter. It's the space allocation. At the end of the day, in cities, it's about geometry. And we need to make sure that the space on the street is to move and connect the most people to the most important things in their lives rather than just move cars and trucks. That's really not going to work if we do that.
Absolutely. And I love how you explained it, because there's so many factors that have to be working in sync
Right.
for this to happen. But there, something that you brought up, especially the fact that grid cities, it's not completely hopeless. We can do so much to increase connectivity, especially when it comes to multimodal connectivity using the system that we currently have. But that doesn't mean that the new cities or the new areas that we're developing, they need to be thought about much more from a human perspective. And visiting cities around the world, especially in Europe, like Barcelona, for example, you see the smart densification. It's not extremely high. Whereas here in Toronto, there are areas in certain TODs where you see extreme densification. And what that's doing is it's only leading to more congestion. And now, rather than the TOD being a place to bring people, people are trying to avoid it just because of
Yeah,
absolute,
exactly.
right?
Because that uniform density is much more important than sporadic density. And unfortunately, the North American English-speaking country model has been sporadic density, very dense downtowns, sometimes not really dense, just high floor area ratio, FAR. But then there's just a vacant parking lot next door. There's a vacant lot the lot after that. And then there's a sea of just nothing, right? And then it's just low density sprawl everywhere else with pockets of these densities. That just makes the system really stressed. The system works like Wi-Fi, like a routing network. It needs a parallel network servers. It needs to move data across corridors that have lots of multiple optionality. But when you concentrate them in these nodes and that's all you have, it just creates a lot of friction, which creates a lot of congestion. The way around that is to connect all those nodes with high capacity, reliable and fast and frequent transport, whether it's transit, protected bicycling and two-wheel and three-wheeler services. That's how you can actually help manage those situations. But you're right, in the future state, the next round of urban development we want to see is much more biophilic, which mimicking nature. Think of at the cellulosic level, cellular structure. Think of the cells, the patterns in leaves, the patterns in water, the patterns on Earth. When the Earth dries up, that pattern that we have, that's a geometric pattern that is basically universal. It's found in nature. We need to mimic that more. And what you find is when you have a city based on a cell system or a cell structure, it is more efficient, it's more effective, it increases the floor area ratio without increasing the physical footprint, less materials to actually house the same amount of people and things. And we can actually create transport systems that are basically separated. In other words, you can walk unimpeded through these cellular urban developments and never once interact with a car. The number one concern for parents with children is people in cars are they going to hurt my children or take my children? And so if we can separate the car space from the walking, bicycling, and what we call the urban amenity space, you have a much more safer, quieter, and more convivial environment, which is going back, frankly, to the world before cars, where children played outside, people actually sat down with elders and actually talked about life. They had games. You heard the sound of leaves and music and birds and play and laughter, not honking and the sound of machines constantly making you feel sick. In lots of studies that have been shown that, right? People who live very close to high traffic noises actually have a deterioration in their DNA. Their physical immune system deteriorates. So we have to make our cities quieter from a traffic noise perspective, but more vibrant from a laughter, joy, and fun perspective. And so it's not just the technology, it's not just the urban form and the transport system, it's the noises. That's really what makes people feel good about places. Think about this, for example. What is the number one thing that people do when they go traveling that they remember about cities? It's those wonderful plazas, those wonderful spaces, those places where they saw a market or a restaurant or cafe, or they saw people laughing, a water fountain, etc. It's not a parking lot. They don't remember parking lots. The memory is not a 5-story car parking structure, right? So we have to create more of those spaces and less of those situations
I
in
love
cities
it.
to make it
Enhancing human
yeah,
experiences
yeah,
using
exactly,
the urban environment. Absolutely.
absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
the way that you described it, it hits home. And I think for a lot of people, even who haven't studied urban planning, like just understanding, designing our environment with nature in mind is becoming so important because, stress levels, time stuck in traffic, work-life balance, these are now, we're starting to see the results on
Yeah,
society, and this is a very
absolutely.
good reflection time to look at, okay, what have we as a society been doing good and doing bad, and where can we improve? And I think that for planners, for decision makers, for developers, the all of this is becoming very important, and you're starting to see now certain master plan communities being developed with public spaces at the core, at the center of it all. And
Right.
this takes us to our next point that I wanted to cover with you, Tim. So, talking about taking it from a global and a macro level, I'd like to now understand from a micro cities level, understand some cities that are really making strides in a very positive way, and what are they doing? Who are they? And where do we really see that glimmer of hope today?
Yeah, so there's a lot of glimmers of hope. There's glimmers happening all over the world, which is great. And it's not just, we tend to focus on Northwestern Europe as like this is the future. Look, they were given a really good hand, right? They were given cities that were basically fully built out before the caravan showed up, So they've kind of kept the status quo. In fact, they've actually made some big mistakes. So we don't need to always look at Northwestern Europe as the example, because their suburbs, frankly, look like the American suburbs, look like the Australian suburbs. So it's not what you started with, it's where you're at today that's most important. And I think what's I want to point out as well is it doesn't matter how big or small you are as a city, the problems are the same problems, they're universal, the scale is different. And so the toolkit becomes more narrow when you're a smaller city. It's actually more simple. And the toolkit becomes much more expanded and more complex and complicated when you're a very big city. So I want all the people watching this not to think, well, that doesn't apply to me. It does. It's just very, very different. But we're talking about cities. This is not a webinar on rural areas. It's not a webinar on mountain. This is about cities right now. So let's focus on the city discussion. There are a lot of cities doing extraordinary things right now, whether it is Barcelona, for example, with its super blocks, where they're basically saying, they have a very grid, they're stuck with their grid, they can't change their grid. They've tried to make it more walkable, more bikeable, more transit oriented, but the grid is the grid. And so what they're saying is, okay, well, can we take out 3 by 3 of these blocks and make them more difficult, I would say, or car light, not exactly car free, but car light. So where the car is the guest in this area. What that means now is that there's more room, because when we have a street that's filled with cars, there's no room for anybody. When we take the cars out of the situation, between 2 buildings, we have plenty of room. That can become play space, it can become outdoor space, it can become nature, it can become food growing opportunities, it can become any community asset we want in that space. It's also a place where kids can play and feel safe, right? So that's a really important opportunity. And not just Barcelona is doing this, dozens of cities around the world are doing this, where they're converting what was space before for people that got co-opted for space for cars is now going back to being space for people again. And so we're seeing that. I can list a bunch of cities: Rome, Florence, Milan, Barcelona. But we're seeing it in South America as well. Bogota, we're seeing it in Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, we're seeing it in Lima, we're seeing it in so many cities, right? And we're seeing it in Africa as well, whether it's in Northern Africa, in South Africa. We're seeing lots of places all over the world. And even in North America, in car-obsessed North America, there are places and spaces that are becoming more and more convivial to creating places for people. The program in San Francisco, when I was there, we started what was called Sunday Streets. We basically took out a block or two, or even a stretch of street, and on Sundays we closed it and basically said, this is opening for people. So it's not the negative connotation was, oh, you're closing it for cars, and we said, no, we're opening it for people. And that meant that the car was not going to be part of it that day, just that day. And then we offered it for people to play, and people started saying extraordinary things like, oh my God, I can hear trees. I can hear like the leaves rusting the trees. I can hear the birds again. I can hear people laughing. I can hear all the sounds of the city except the car noise, right? And then that Sunday streets became every Sunday, and then all of a sudden it grew to more streets, and then the whole world started doing this, and we've seen hundreds of cities now worldwide doing these programs. In other places, it's called ciclavia, where they basically have miles and miles of street. You know, Bogota pioneered that in Colombia, but we've seen it all over, up and down South America, all over the world now, where they will basically have stretches of streets that are for people to see what it's like to be in a world where we don't have to have cars dominate everything around us. But that's just one example. Then there's a lot of cities that are basically putting in dedicated bike lanes and dedicated bus lanes, and really flipping the switch on making it safer, convenient, and easier to get around in ways that don't result in you reaching for your car keys and driving for the first time. And these are light policy measures, but they're very strong movement into giving people the signal that you matter, you count. If you walk or bicycle, we are going to protect you. We're going to create spaces that make you feel safe. But not just feeling safe, we're going to celebrate you. We're going to create spaces that are beautiful, that are inviting. We can actually play games and have events and have someone playing music and have concerts and series. So all these things now create more vitality around these spaces. And it means that not just the physical policy part of changing the street to make it more walkable, bikeable, or more public transit oriented, but actually making it a place where you want to hang out and linger and experience. And this helps businesses. This is not just a fun thing to do. All the local businesses in the area, when they have these changes, they're seeing more foot traffic. More foot traffic means more foot sales. That means more sales to them. And so you're supporting local business at the same time, which is a win-win for the economy, because ultimately the city becomes a more livable and economically sustainable place to live. And it becomes greener as well, because now there's more room to plant gardens and trees and create more green space.
Absolutely. No, it's so important because, when families can, I remember, I think it was in Barcelona, there was certain streets that I had visited in the past that were only dedicated to automobiles, and now they put the cobblestone, and I literally saw kids, just running around and jumping, and
Right.
their parents felt like, that freedom of, not having to hold their kid because there's too many cars around. And I'm
Right.
starting to see that now in North America. In master plan communities, like let's say in Florida or something, it's easier to do from the ground up. But my
Right.
question now would be, how can cities really take the first steps into, bringing these kind of systems? And now with the emergence of a lot of data, IoT,
Right.
monitoring, planning, how do they take the steps towards becoming more walkable, likable, like you said, and friendly to pedestrians and public transport users?
Absolutely. So there's lots of things they can do, but the first step is that you have to want to do it. So the first thing is admitting a problem, admit that there's a problem. So define that problem and then look at solutions, but don't look at solutions from being these 25-year. A lot of times cities tend to do these 25-year planning processes of like, yes, we need 20 subways and we need all this stuff to change. Agreed. But the public is not going to be interested in something that's 25 years away. What can you do in 25 days?
Yeah.
What can you do in 25 weeks? That's what the public wants to do. So what that means is working with the community that you basically work with and identify, well, which parts of this neighborhood, which block can we have as Sunday streets? Starting really small. So basically having a big vision, but then betting small and doing pilots, because pilots are the best way to learn and to also apply these to do three things. One is we're basically trying something different, really important, because the status quo is not working anymore. So that's number one. Number two, it sends a message to the community that we're trying, we're listening to you, and we're going to try these out. We don't have the answers, but we're going to give it a shot. Whether it's for 12 weeks or 12 months, we're going to try something out and pilot it. It's reversible, which is also important, right? So if it doesn't work, or we need to tweak a little bit, we can just use paint, striping, and signage and make that work. We don't have to force a big infrastructure change on the community when no one has agreed to it and we don't know the outcomes. Too many times, unfortunately, in many developing parts of the world and in places outside of Europe and North America, they're taking on the ideas from the 60s and 70s and applying them to the 2020s. Flyovers are a big mistake, for example. pedestrian separated bridges so that we can have more car traffic. Those are just the wrong way to do things. You want to go the other way and say, okay, how do we actually look at our cities and say, which neighborhoods do we like that have the most services and amenities? How do we create those areas that we can actually hang out with and create more plazas and spaces? And the plaza space could be just some barricades temporarily to close it off while we work on the design and then fundraise to get the funding to make it more permanent. But there's multiple examples of this. New York City did a lot of these. So did Paris. So did San Francisco, Portland. We saw it in Buenos Aires. We saw it in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. We saw it in places in Bangkok, Tokyo, like Singapore. The list goes on and on and on. And what this all says to us is that it doesn't matter how big or small you are, if you can do some pilots and just start from that place of how do we want to look at these spaces? What do we want them to be like? And then take the cars out of the situation. Say, okay, without cars, what does this space actually look like? And you'll notice that you can do a lot more than saying, well, how do we move everybody? Because sometimes you can't move everybody. You can't move people and bicycles and cars and trucks and buses. There's just not enough room between the buildings. And I think that's the mistake that people make is to do that. You do need to do both. And so what it is when you work out those pilot areas and you figure out how to create those spaces, then you need a layer of digital support above you, because you do need to move the traffic still around you. You need to figure out how to move everybody around in a way that allows people to still move. You don't want to create gridlock. And so the opportunity is out there. If you have the budget and you have the resources and you're able to, then definitely invest in IoT device technology, definitely invest in digital twin technology, because that gives you an extra layer of scenario planning. Now you can see like, well, what if we do this over here? What's the likely effect to the system? And how much of it can we tolerate before we get to the point where nothing's moving, right? You could try that out in the public, but politically you're getting a lot of hot water and it'd be a really hard thing to do. Or you could just do some scenario testing out with a digital twin, and that will actually show you in real time 50 different scenarios. And it's basically within your laboratory, it's within your lab. You haven't touched the streets at all yet. But then it also will show you that you actually could do these things and you could actually make these changes and the system will be okay. And that gives people, especially staff working in cities, it'll give them like that extra layer of support and extra layer of confidence that we can try this stuff out. So there's policy interventions you can do. There's physical street interventions or urban interventions you can do. And then there's the digital support that you have. The three things together allow you to think big, isolate specific situations, and start implementing in real time.
Oh my God.
And then the public will see that.
I love it because you're not just enhancing human life, but you're giving people the opportunity to earn a better living. You're increasing accessibility, and we know that especially in the suburbs, there's bigger health risks because you're walking less, you're meeting with your neighbors less, etc. So I feel like we're at a crossroads right now, and it's a huge opportunity for us from a city level to be like, okay, we've been in this lab for, especially for the last 60 to 100 years, and we're starting to really understand the pros and cons of each. And what makes me really excited is listening to people like you, learning from individuals like you who really worked from the ground level up, and now you're advising global cities and global entities on the direction they need to take. And the exciting part of all of this is that we are collectively learning from each other and we can grow together, and the ultimate purpose is to allow cities to be for people. Now we're reclaiming them, and it is an exciting time. So unfortunately, like, that was probably the fastest half an hour of my life, but like, I could listen to you for hours. The knowledge that you have, the experience that you have, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your time with me today, and allowing everybody here to learn about transportation and mobility, especially for the urban landscape, how it's changing and how it's transforming, and how we can all be a part of the future together.
Well, it's been my pleasure too, and I love talking about this and cities. And if anybody needs to get hold of me, please contact me. Again, Tim Papandreou, founder and CEO of Emerging Transport Advisors, and always happy to help cities because the cities are our future, and so I'm excited about that.
Amazing. What a way to end it. Thank you so much, Tim. I can't wait to see you again.
Likewise, all the best. Thanks.